There is a sound that just doesn't belong on a ranch at 6 a.m. A sound that rips through the peaceful silence of the high desert and replaces it with pure, cold panic. That sound is a gunshot. I heard it before my eyes were even open, and in that split second of confusion, still half tangled in my sheets, my mind went straight to the worst-case scenario. Was it a coyote, poachers? Or was my biggest concern my great black bull Apollo in danger? I flew out of bed, adrenaline already flooding my system, and barreled straight toward the bedroom window. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it was trying to escape, and what I saw out there, marching across the south pasture of the Ironwood Ranch like they owned the damn place, made me curse loud enough to wake the dead. It was a group of men, strangers, dressed head to toe in cheap camo gear, rifles slung over their shoulders. They were trespassing. Now, if you'd asked me 2 days earlier who could stir up trouble faster than a twister through a trailer park, I wouldn't have hesitated. It was Brenda Covington. Brenda was the self-appointed tyrant of the local homeowners association, the one who treated neighborhood bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments handed down to her personally. And the only problem with her grand authority? The Ironwood Ranch didn't fall under the HOA's jurisdiction. Not one single inch of my 3-generation family land was part of her little kingdom. That didn't stop her, though. She called my barns an eyesore. She complained about the smell of my cattle. She criticized the way I stacked my hay. Honestly, to hear her talk, you'd think I was running a toxic waste dump instead of an honest-to-God working ranch. And then there was Apollo. Apollo wasn't just livestock. He was my pride, my greatest achievement. He was a massive, glossy black Angus bull with the temperament of a wise old sage. He'd won every blue ribbon and trophy across 3 counties. More than the awards, he was family. Every morning, he'd wander over to the porch fence, give a soft, rumbly snort, and wait patiently for his head scratch and that quiet moment of understanding we shared. I had raised him from a tiny calf. There was nothing in this world that could ever replace him. The day before the gunshot, I'd seen something strange. Fresh tire tracks near the creek on the south side of the property. They weren't mine. They weren't Hank's, my nearest neighbor. When I mentioned it to Hank later, we were having coffee at the diner, he just chuckled and said, "You know Brenda." I heard her at the meeting Tuesday, bragging that she was finally going to find a way to manage your ranch problem once and for all. I'd brushed it off then, thinking Brenda's threats were always empty and mostly hot air. Now, standing in my boxers, watching armed strangers violate my property, I knew I should have taken Hank a whole lot more seriously. I yanked on jeans and boots so fast I nearly tripped down the stairs, grabbing my phone and the old hunting shotgun, not because I wanted a fight, but because a man has the right to defend his home. I tore out the back door, yelling the whole way, "Hey, get off my land! You're trespassing!" The men looked up, not with fear or guilt, but casually, bored, like they were waiting for a bus. One of them, a big guy with a patchy beard, even grinned and tipped his camouflage baseball cap. "Relax, buddy," he drawled, hands still on his rifle. "We got permission." My blood boiled faster than a branding iron in the forge. "Permission? From who?" I barked. He shrugged, pointing vaguely back toward the main road. "The HOA lady, Brenda, said the owner was fine with us hunting deer on this patch. Said you needed to thin the herd. I thought I was going to blow a gasket right there. First, Brenda had zero authority over my land. Second, she didn't know the difference between a white-tailed deer and a dairy cow. And third, nobody gave these jokers permission to be here. I pointed toward the perimeter fence. You see that wire? That fence? The sign on it that says private property, no trespassing? That's your first damn clue. You need to leave. Now." Then the tall guy, the one with the mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes, looked at me with a lazy, bored expression. He didn't drop his rifle. He just casually turned, scanned the field, and lifted his weapon up to his shoulder. And that's when I saw Apollo. He was standing maybe 40 yards away, curious as ever about the strangers, his coat gleaming like obsidian in the morning sun. He was head high, powerful, majestic. "No," I screamed, a sound ripped from deep in my chest. But it was too late. The sharp crack echoed again, louder this time, and Apollo staggered back, his massive body swaying like a falling redwood. I dropped my shotgun right there in the dirt and ran faster than I've ever moved in my entire life. When I reached him, Apollo was on his side, gasping, a sickening amount of blood pooling into the mud beneath his gigantic frame. "You stupid sons of—" I choked, the rage overwhelming my ability to even form a full sentence. I pressed my hands against the wound, completely useless against the damage a high-powered rifle had done. The bearded hunter mumbled something about a clean kill and legal hunting season. I spun on him so fast he stumbled back 3 paces. "There is no hunting season here, you idiot. This is private land. This is my bull, my Apollo. You just shot him on my property." I was shaking with heartbreak and pure violent fury. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and wet with Apollo's blood, and managed to call Doc Harris, my vet. Then I called Sheriff Montgomery's office. "I need help now." I got out, the words ragged. The hunters started looking genuinely nervous. The big one wanted to leave, but the tall guy stood his ground for a moment, trying to cling to some shred of misplaced authority. But even he knew the situation had spiraled completely out of control. As the first siren started wailing in the distance, cutting through the silence of the valley, Brenda herself pulled up in her gleaming white SUV, looking exactly how I expected. Smug, self-satisfied, and victorious. She stepped out, adjusting her expensive sunglasses, clipboard clutched to her chest like a trophy. "Clayton," she announced loudly, her voice dripping with the fakest kind of concern. "What is all this noise about?" "I was just conducting a routine inspection." "You did this?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, low and deadly. I could feel the promise of destruction forming in my throat. "You are going to pay for this, Brenda. I swear on every patch of dirt on this ranch, you will pay." Apollo moaned softly behind me, a low, wrenching sound of pain. I knelt again, pressing my hand gently against his massive head, whispering a promise into his ear. "Hang on, buddy. Just hang on. We're going to make this right." And in that moment, I knew that whatever the cost, whatever it took, I was going to make Brenda Covington regret the day she ever set foot near the Ironwood Ranch. The siren grew louder, Deputy Reed's cruiser skidding to a stop in the dirt drive, kicking up a furious cloud of dust. Deputy Reed, a young guy, stepped out, immediately recognizing this was no ordinary trespass call. His hand hovered near his holster. I pointed at the hunters, who had clustered awkwardly near the fence line. "There they are," I snapped. "Trespassing, illegal discharge, and they just shot my prize bull." Reed approached them cautiously. The fat hunter immediately started sputtering about having permission from the HOA president. Brenda, meanwhile, sauntered over, trying to use her clipboard as a shield of respectability. "Officer," she cooed in that syrupy sweet tone, "these gentlemen were simply enjoying a lawful culling trip. It was all perfectly authorized." "Authorized by who?" I demanded, shouting over her. "You have no authority here, Brenda. This is private land." She shot me a look that could have curdled a vat of fresh milk. I saw it in her eyes. She truly believed that her fake title and made-up rules superseded the law. Deputy Reed turned to me. "Sir, do you have documentation that confirms this property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction?" I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of the question, but I held it in. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and showed him the official county property maps I'd saved years ago for exactly this kind of nonsense. Reed studied them, then nodded curtly. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Brenda, his voice now firm. "Unless you can show me a deed or some legal authority that grants you control over Mr. Thorne's property, you are interfering with a private landowner's rights. That is a serious offense." Brenda's face went from smug to a fascinating shade of fire truck red. She spluttered about community rights, but Reed ignored her, focusing on the hunters. The fat one tried to hand over a crumpled piece of paper, a so-called permit, complete with a sloppy signature and a cheap-looking HOA stamp. Reed examined it with a frown that said he smelled something foul. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The fat man jerked a thumb toward Brenda. "She gave it to us, said we could hunt hogs and deer to thin out the population." My blood boiled again. Hogs and deer. Brenda didn't know a deer track from a cow patty, and Apollo was paying the price for her arrogance. Reed called in Sheriff Montgomery, an old-school lawman who didn't tolerate games. When Montgomery arrived, he took one look at the scene and sighed, rubbing his temples like he was fighting a Texas-sized headache. Here's the thing, Montgomery said slowly. The hunters believed they had permission, so they might skate by with a heavy fine, a misdemeanor at worst. But Brenda, he looked right at her. You, ma'am, are facing felony charges for forgery, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy. Brenda went so pale I thought she might actually faint. That was the first good news I'd heard all day. But it still wasn't enough. It wasn't justice for Apollo, who was still struggling in the dirt. While the legal talk dragged on, Doc Harris finally arrived, screeching to a halt in his dusty old truck. Doc, a wiry man with steel-gray hair and hands that knew their job, rushed to Apollo's side. He worked quickly, checking vitals, cleaning the massive wound, murmuring to his assistant. He's a fighter, Clay, Doc muttered to me. Bad hit, but not hopeless. If he makes it through the next 24 hours, he has a chance. I nodded, the lump in my throat impossible to swallow. Whatever it takes, Doc. Do whatever it takes. As Apollo was stabilized and carefully loaded onto a trailer for emergency surgery, I turned back to the circus. Brenda was still trying to argue her way out of it, throwing around legal terms she barely understood. Sheriff Montgomery finally had enough. He cuffed her right there, reading her rights, while half the neighborhood, drawn by the sirens, watched from their porches. You can't do this, Brenda shrieked, struggling. I'm the HOA president. I have rights. Montgomery just shook his head slowly. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. The hunters were cited and their weapons were confiscated. They slunk away like scolded dogs, faces red, their muttered apologies falling flat in the tense air. I stood there as the dust settled. Apollo was gone to the clinic, Brenda was hauled off in the cruiser, and the hunters were packing up under police escort. My heart was still pounding, but underneath the heartbreak, a slow, deep sense of resolve took root. This was not over. Kerren had picked a fight she couldn't possibly win. She had underestimated me, underestimated Apollo, and she had forgotten that country folks don't forget. And they sure as hell don't forgive easily when you mess with their land and their loyalty. I walked back toward the house, my boots heavy with mud, blood, and sweat, and I made myself a vow. I was just getting started. The next morning, the air on the ranch felt heavy, almost suffocating. I hadn't slept, my mind oscillating between grief and cold fury. Apollo was fighting for his life, and I was stuck here, staring at the empty pasture. Brenda had been booked and processed, but thanks to some slimy lawyer friend, she was already out on bail. I knew she was the type to double down on her lies and drag everyone down with her. Sure enough, the phone started ringing. Local reporters were sniffing around, asking if the rumors were true. Had a crazed rancher attacked innocent hunters? Was it true the rogue bull needed to be put down? Brenda was spinning a web of half-truths, trying to control the narrative. I kept my mouth shut, let her dig her own grave. I had other plans. First, I went to Hank, my neighbor. Hank was the one who'd warned me. I asked him flat out if he'd testify, if he'd tell the court what he heard Brenda bragging about. Hank spat into the dirt and nodded without hesitation. I've had enough of her nonsense, Clay. You tell me when and where. Next, I went to my real evidence, the trail cameras. A few years ago, after some petty theft, I'd installed cameras all over the property, disguised in fence posts, even birdhouses. I spent hours combing through the footage, and finally, my patience paid off. Clear as a bell, there she was, Brenda in her ridiculous oversized sunglasses, meeting the hunters, pointing at my property line on a map, and actually laughing about how she was doing everyone a favor. It was the smoking gun. Armed with Hank's statement and the video, I set up a meeting with Sheriff Montgomery. He watched the video in silence, his jaw tightening. When the clip ended, he leaned back and let out a low whistle. Well, Clay, he said, looks like you've got yourself a slam dunk. Forgery, criminal trespassing, endangerment, animal cruelty, and maybe even conspiracy. I wasn't smiling yet. It wasn't enough to win in court. I wanted this to be public, undeniable, and permanent. Montgomery suggested I take the evidence to a civil attorney, too. Criminal charges punish her, but a civil lawsuit. That hits her where it really hurts. Her wallet. I agreed instantly. The more pressure from every side, the better. Meanwhile, Brenda, still trying to salvage her shattered reputation, organized a community meeting at the HOA clubhouse that weekend. She claimed she wanted to set the record straight. I decided to attend. Not because I cared about her version of events, but because I wanted to see how far she would sink. Hank came with me, and so did a dozen other neighbors, all curious for the show. Brenda stood at the front, wearing a neat blue dress and a forced, brittle smile. She launched into a tearful speech about community values and misunderstanding, painting herself as the victim, wrongfully accused by a bitter landowner. She even produced a few fake letters, supposedly from neighbors, thanking her for her leadership. I recognized that loopy cursive immediately, the same handwriting she used on the fake hunting permit. She was desperate enough to forge support letters. When she opened the floor, Hank spoke up first. "Brenda," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "how exactly does giving armed strangers access to someone else's land without their permission fit into community values?" Brenda stammered something about poor communication. Another neighbor chimed in, asking why she told people the Ironwood Ranch was abandoned. That was when I stepped forward, holding up the tiny flash drive between two fingers. "I've got footage," I said calmly. "That says otherwise. Full video, audio too. If anyone wants to see the real story, I'd be happy to share." A ripple went through the crowd. Brenda blanched visibly, her fake smile completely shattering for one brief, terrified second. I turned and walked out, leaving the drive on the table. I had made my point. The next day, I filed the civil lawsuit. Damages for Apollo's staggering medical costs, lost income from canceled shows, emotional distress, and punitive damages for willful, malicious action. The total amount was so high it would make anyone sweat, even Brenda's rich but tight-fisted husband. I heard through the grapevine she screamed so loud when she got served, half the block heard her. While the legal gears turned, I focused on Apollo. Doc Harris called with guarded good news. Apollo was stable. The big guy was a fighter. I visited him every single day, bringing him treats, talking to him about the weather and the ranch. His dark eyes followed me with a tired but utterly determined glint. He wasn't giving up, and neither was I. The courthouse parking lot was already full the morning of Brenda's final hearing. Trucks, sedans, and 2 news vans were crammed into every available space. This was it. Months of work, Apollo's agonizing recovery, the community meetings. It all came down to this. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to chew. Brenda sat at the defendant's table, hair perfect, makeup thick, but her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. My lawyer, a stone-cold professional, just flipped through our mountain of evidence and gave me a slight nod. "We've got her." The first half hour was a devastating parade of evidence. The fake permit, the video footage showing her guiding the hunters, the vet bills, and the old HOA minutes Mrs. Simmons had quietly slipped me, showing Brenda's long history of bending every rule to suit herself. Every piece stacked higher and higher. Brenda tried to object once, interrupting the judge mid-sentence. "Your Honor, this is a big misunderstanding. I was only trying to help the community." The judge's gavel came down hard, silencing her. "Sit down, Mrs. Covington," the judge, an older woman with eyes like steel, said. "You will have your turn." When it was finally her time to speak, Brenda launched into a theatrical, tearful speech about her dedication to the neighborhood and her deep, deep regret. She even dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, trying desperately to squeeze out a tear. The judge was completely unmoved. "Mrs. Covington," she said after the performance ended, "if you were truly concerned about safety, you would have contacted animal control, not handed rifles to unlicensed hunters, and sent them onto private property." The judge shook her head slowly. "Your actions were reckless, endangering not just livestock but human lives." The gavel came down again. "I find the defendant, Brenda Covington, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted into a low hum. Brenda looked stunned, genuinely shocked that her tears and entitlement hadn't worked. The judge continued reading the sentence. Brenda was ordered to pay a $250,000 fine for damages and legal fees. She was banned from holding any position of authority within the HOA or any similar organization for a minimum of 10 years. A restraining order was placed. preventing her from coming within 200 yards of the Ironwood Ranch or Apollo. And to top it all off, she was sentenced to 6 months of probation with mandatory community service, working at the county animal shelter. The look on her face when she heard that last part was pure devastation. Brenda, the woman who looked down her nose at everyone, would now spend her days cleaning kennels and picking up after stray dogs. It was better than any revenge I could have planned. As the courtroom cleared, the reporters descended. I gave them the short version. "I was just protecting my land and my animals," I said. "Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. That's all there is to it." Brenda, meanwhile, fled through a side door, shielding her face with her fancy purse. Pictures of her defeated, teary face were plastered across every local news site by nightfall. "Justice for Apollo," one headline read. In the weeks that followed, Brenda quietly put her house on the market. Rumor had it she was moving out of state, trying to escape the mess she'd made. No one wished her luck. The few who had defended her now pretended they never knew her. Her house sold quickly to a young family with a couple of kids and a golden retriever, the kind of folks who wave when they drive by and respect a man's fence line. I focused on the ranch. Apollo was getting better every day. I entered him into the upcoming county fair, not for the ribbons, but because I wanted him to stand tall and proud again, where everyone could see what real strength looked like. The day of the fair dawned cool and bright. I brushed Apollo until his black coat gleamed like a mirror. Just a few months ago, I was kneeling in the mud, certain I was losing him forever. Now, he walked into the trailer with a steady gait that made my chest swell with pride. At the fairgrounds, Apollo was the star. People recognized him. "That's the bull that woman tried to have shot," they whispered. When our number was called, I led him into the show ring. Apollo stood beside me, majestic, muscles rippling. When the announcer boomed his name over the loudspeaker, Grand Champion, the crowd erupted. Apollo tossed his head and let out a deep, victorious bellow that shook the air. Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, I stood by the fence, watching him graze. He looked up at me with those calm, steady eyes. "We did it, buddy," I whispered. "We came through. We're still standing. Kerren was gone now. Just a sour memory. The community was healing. Just like Apollo, and just like me." The ranch hummed with life, hope, and a deep, steady contentment. This was home. This was life, and no one, not even a spiteful HOA queen, was ever going to take that away. But let me ask you this. Brenda faced criminal charges, a massive fine, a restraining order, and community service. Was that enough justice for nearly killing a family animal and violating someone's home? Or do you think the judge should have thrown the book at her harder? What would you have done if you were standing there with me that morning? Let me know in the comments below. And tell me if you've ever dealt with a situation where someone with a little bit of power thought they could just walk all over you. I'm reading every single comment.